Throughout history, the throne has never been a place of safety. For some monarchs, power was not just a privilege, it was a death sentence. In this video, we delve into the dramatic and often brutal world of royal assassination, where betrayal comes cloaked in shadows and the cost of power is paid in blood. Join us as we uncover the gripping stories behind the murders of three kings: James I of Scotland, slain in a darkened sewer passage; Henry VI of England, struck down in the Tower amid civil war; and Gustav III of Sweden, gunned down at a masquerade ball in a scene worthy of opera. These are not just tales of death, they are windows into the politics, paranoia, and power struggles that shaped history. The brutal assassination of King James I of Scotland on the night of February 20th, 1437, was one of the most dramatic and consequential events in medieval Scottish history. Far from a random act of violence, it was the culmination of political tensions, personal vendettas, and James's own attempts to centralize royal power in a feudal kingdom long dominated by powerful nobles. His murder not only shocked the realm, but exposed the fragile foundations of authority in 15th century Scotland. James I's early life was shaped by tragedy and captivity. Born in 1394, he became heir to the Scottish throne after the death of his elder brother. In 1406, while attempting to escape to France to avoid capture by the English, the 12-year-old James was seized by pirates and handed over to King Henry IV of England. James would spend the next 18 years as a royal hostage, albeit treated with the education and training befitting a prince. During his absence, Scotland was ruled by regents, first his uncle, the Duke of Albany, and later his son. These regents allowed the nobility to grow increasingly powerful, and royal authority weakened. When James was finally released in 1424, he returned to a kingdom where the crown held little real control. Determined to restore and strengthen the monarchy, James immediately began a campaign of reform and retribution. James I was a strong-willed and highly educated king, influenced by the centralized monarchies he had observed during his captivity in England. He sought to bring Scotland under tighter royal control through legal reform, fiscal reorganization, and most notably, the suppression of powerful noble families. His most dramatic move came in 1425 when he arrested and executed his cousin Murdoch Stuart, Duke of Albany, effectively eliminating the rival Albany branch of the royal family. While these actions earned him a reputation as a determined and energetic monarch, they also made him enemies. Nobles who once acted with impunity now found themselves under surveillance or attack. Landholders were taxed more heavily, and royal justice began encroaching on local feudal authority. In many ways, James was a modernizing monarch, but in a deeply medieval kingdom where personal loyalty and blood ties still ruled. The seeds of James's downfall were planted by his own authoritarian style and personal enmities. Chief among his enemies was Sir Robert Graham, a former ally who turned against James after being stripped of his influence and imprisoned. Graham joined forces with members of the extended Albany family and, crucially, with Walter Stewart, Earl of Athol, James's uncle, who held a plausible claim to the throne himself. Athol's motives were a complex mix of ambition, bitterness, and revenge. His son, David Stewart, had died in suspicious circumstances while imprisoned by James, and Athol never forgave the king. By 1436, a full conspiracy had formed. The conspirators planned not only to assassinate James, but to claim the throne and reverse his centralizing policies. In February 1437, James traveled with his court to the Dominican friary in Perth. There, in what should have been the safety of religious sanctuary, the assassins struck. On the night of February 20th, a group of around 30 conspirators, led by Sir Robert Graham, broke into the friary with the help of insiders who had disabled the door bolts. James, alerted by the noise, attempted to flee. In a desperate move, he tore up floorboards and hid in a sewer tunnel beneath the building. But his effort was in vain. The tunnel's exit had recently been blocked to prevent tennis balls from rolling into it, an ironic and tragic twist. The assassins found James hiding and stabbed him repeatedly, records suggest as many as 16 times, before leaving his mutilated body in the dark. The murder did not bring the result the conspirators hoped for. Instead of sparking a successful coup, it prompted a brutal crackdown. Queen Joan Beaufort, James's English-born wife, survived the attack and rallied loyalists. Over the following months, the assassins were captured, tortured, and executed in gruesome fashion. Walter Stewart, Earl of Athol, was tortured over 3 days before being executed, his death designed as a public deterrent to treason. James's son, James II, was only 6 years old at the time of the assassination. His minority was dominated by noble factions, but the trauma of his father's murder left a deep impression on the young king and arguably shaped his own violent reign. James I's assassination also marked a turning point in the Scottish monarchy. It became clear that while kings claimed divine right, their rule depended on balancing noble support, not crushing it outright. King James I of Scotland was a ruler ahead of his time, a reformer with a vision of centralized, modern kingship in a realm still dominated by feudal loyalties and clan politics. His assassination was not merely the result of personal vendettas, but a clash between old and new orders. In his death, James became a martyr for monarchy, yet his reforms largely failed to take root in the unstable years that followed. His life and death stand as a stark reminder of the perilous nature of power in medieval Scotland and the thin line between justice and vengeance. The assassination of King Henry VI of England in 1471 marked the violent conclusion of one of the most turbulent reigns in English history. A monarch defined by weakness, religious devotion, and political naivete, Henry was caught in the deadly crossfire of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic conflict between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. His death in the Tower of London symbolized not only the fall of the Lancastrian cause, but also the brutal realpolitik of a kingdom torn apart by civil war. Born in 1421, Henry VI became King of England just 9 months later, after the untimely death of his father, Henry V, one of England's greatest warrior kings. The contrast between father and son could not have been more stark. Where Henry V had been a commanding leader and skilled strategist, Henry VI was deeply pious, indecisive, and emotionally fragile. He lacked the assertiveness and charisma needed to control a fractious nobility or to govern a kingdom at war. During his early reign, governance fell to a regency council, and England continued to fight in the Hundred Years' War with France. However, by the mid-1440s, military defeats and political blunders, including the unpopular cession of territories in France, eroded public confidence in the crown. At home, corruption, mismanagement, and favoritism at court stirred unrest. Key noble families began to position themselves as alternatives to royal leadership. Henry's periodic mental breakdowns, including a complete collapse in 1453, further weakened the monarchy. His condition was likely a form of catatonic schizophrenia or another severe mental illness, which rendered him unresponsive for months at a time. These episodes created political vacuums, sparking power struggles among England's nobility, most notably between the House of Lancaster, to which Henry belonged, and the House of York. The Wars of the Roses formally began in 1455, a dynastic struggle rooted in disputes over legitimate succession and royal competence. Richard, Duke of York, asserted a claim to the throne based on his descent from Edward III and challenged the authority of Henry and his queen, Margaret of Anjou. The ensuing decades were marked by a series of battles, shifting alliances, and temporary restorations. Henry VI became little more than a pawn in these conflicts. Captured and deposed in 1461 after the Battle of Towton, one of the bloodiest battles in English history, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London while the Yorkist Edward IV was crowned king. Henry briefly regained the throne in 1470 during a remarkable political reversal orchestrated by Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker. But this restoration lasted less than a year. In April 1471, Edward IV returned from exile, defeated the Lancastrians at the Battle of Barnet, where Warwick was killed, and again at the Battle of Tewkesbury, where Henry's only son and heir, Edward of Westminster, was slain. With his line extinguished and his supporters either dead or defeated, Henry's fate was sealed. On the night of May 21, 1471, Henry VI was murdered in the Tower of London. Officially, it was claimed that he died of melancholy, a euphemism for natural causes brought on by sorrow and grief. But few contemporaries or historians have accepted this explanation. All evidence points to a quiet, calculated assassination, almost certainly ordered by Edward IV or his close associates to eliminate any possibility of future Lancastrian resurgence. Henry's murder was likely carried out by agents acting under royal orders. One name often associated with the act is Sir Richard of Gloucester, the future King Richard III, who was then a loyal supporter of Edward IV and may have been present at the Tower. However, there is no definitive proof of who wielded the weapon. What is clear is that the killing was swift, efficient, and politically motivated. Some contemporary sources suggest that Edward IV, concerned by the ongoing threat Henry posed as a figurehead for rebellion, authorized the death. With Henry's son dead, his own capacity for rule destroyed, and his cause in ruins, Edward saw no further need for clemency. Henry was buried with little ceremony at Chertsey Abbey, though later reinterred at St. George's Chapel in Windsor during the reign of Henry VI, who sought to legitimize his own rule by honoring the Lancastrian lineage. The assassination of Henry VI marked more than just the death of a king. It signaled the end of the House of Lancaster's claim to the throne and the decisive triumph of the Yorkist cause, at least temporarily. Yet the brutality of the act also deepened the cycle of revenge and bloodshed that characterized the Wars of the Roses. In the decades following his death, Henry VI became a symbol of martyrdom for some. Miracles were reported at his tomb, and popular veneration grew. While never officially canonized, he was regarded by some as a saintly king who had suffered unjustly. Ironically, the man whose weakness had brought England to the brink of collapse became, in death, a figure of spiritual purity and tragic dignity. Henry's assassination also highlighted a grim reality of English politics in the 15th century, that kingship had become a prize to be won or lost on the battlefield, and legitimacy rested more on power than bloodline. His murder paved the way for continued instability, eventually culminating in the rise of the Tudor dynasty under Henry VI, who married Henry VI's niece and ended the Wars of the Roses at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Henry VI's life was marked by sorrow, conflict, and defeat. Ascending the throne as a baby and ruling through some of the most unstable decades in English history, he became a tragic figure, a king too gentle, too passive, and too broken to survive in an era of ruthless ambition. His assassination in the Tower of London was not only a political necessity for his enemies, but a stark reminder that in the Game of Thrones, mercy was often the first casualty. King Gustav III of Sweden was assassinated in 1792, a dramatic event that reflected deep political tensions in Swedish society. Gustav III came to power in 1771 and quickly moved to strengthen royal authority through a coup in 1772. Though he styled himself as an enlightened monarch, supporting arts, education, and legal reforms, his centralization of power alienated the nobility, who resented losing political influence. Over time, noble discontent grew, especially after Gustav introduced reforms that further weakened aristocratic privileges. In 1789, the Act of Union and Security expanded the king's powers, intensifying the conflict. Revolutionary ideas from France also inspired Swedish nobles who viewed Gustav as a tyrant. A group of nobles conspired to kill the king, led by Jacob Johan Ankerström. The plan was carried out at a masquerade ball at the Royal Opera House in Stockholm on March 16, 1792. Ankerström shot Gustav in the back at close range. Although the king initially survived, he died from infection 13 days later. The conspirators were arrested soon after, Ankerström was executed, and others were exiled. Gustav's death led to a regency for his young son, Gustav IV Adolf, and marked a turning point in Swedish politics. Gustav III is remembered as both a patron of culture and a controversial ruler. His assassination highlighted the dangers of absolute monarchy and the growing demand for political reform, mirroring broader revolutionary trends in Europe at the time. The assassinations of King James I, King Henry VI, and King Gustav III remind us that even crowns cannot shield against the dangers of ambition, betrayal, and unrest. Each murder was shaped by the unique tensions of its time. Whether it was the deadly rivalries of Scottish clans, the brutal civil war tearing England apart, or the conspiracies brewing within an enlightened yet divided Swedish court. But in the end, the fate of these monarchs speaks to a timeless truth. That power, however divine or absolute it may seem, always comes with a price. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through royal intrigue and assassination as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which historical mystery you'd like us to explore next.